Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, November 4th, 2024, and on the show today we are going to discuss puzzles, letting cover crops run wild, and it's Messy Monday. So let's talk a little failure, shall we? Let's do it. All right, so what a weekend. I am absolutely whooped. I coached 5 games over 2 days, and I am stunned I even have any sort of voice left. My youngest made it to their championship game and won, which was fun, and the kids had a great time. The other team I coached almost made the championship and played one of the most epic games I've ever coached. It was all super fun. They had to win by 5 goals, and they haven't done that all season, and they did it, but then we had the math wrong, so that was on me. It was all super fun, even those few minutes when they calculated all the tiebreakers to see who was going to advance, thinking maybe it was us. But we ultimately came up a bit short, and that was a bit of a bummer for a second, but what a game. I just love coaching and love watching the kids get better and better. Huge challenge, but incredibly satisfying. I do hope some of you get to sign your kids up for soccer at some point. I know it's an inconvenient weekend event for farmers, but seeing the team building and camaraderie and often lifelong friendships they develop is really special. I will do a whole segment someday of how much I valued sports as a kid who specifically moved around a lot, and I feel sports served me really well throughout my life, making me friends wherever I went and giving me fodder for a farm show. I mean, who knew? I'll save that story for another time, though. More pressingly, I want to talk about Wordle. It's a very hard word to say with my voice today. Today, my Wordle streak finally reached triple digits, 100 days in a row. If you are unfamiliar, Wordle is a simple word game where you have 6 tries to guess a 5-letter word. I go through phases where I do and do not really do my Wordle, but I really enjoy starting my workday with a quick puzzle, and today I finally got to my goal of 100 in a row. It's not even a puzzle I particularly like anymore because I've got my strategy down and it also eats up time, but I love the ritual of it. I also do the Strands puzzle over at the New York Times as well, as often as I can, which is a hard puzzle to explain, but it's basically like a word find type of puzzle. But Strands is a bit more time consuming. So Wordle acts like my shot of espresso first thing in the morning. And then if I can get my work done early, this show and then the farm stuff, the Strands puzzle acts as my nightcap or sweet treat at the end of the workday. I've always loved puzzles. I love riddles. I am not a big crossword person for some reason, or at least not yet, but I love things like Sudoku and word finds and even physical puzzles like the Rubik's Cube. And to be clear, I just enjoy them. But as a side bonus, I guess I have always sort of assumed that doing these sorts of puzzles would help me stave off any sort of mental decline, such as dementia. I have a close older family member who is suffering from dementia, and it is quite intense. I don't personally want that to fall on my kids and my wife if I can help it. Unfortunately, the evidence of that doing puzzles and games will help slow cognitive decline is still pretty slim. I read an article last week in the New York Times that gives a pretty good overview called Can Crosswords and Games Prevent Dementia? Experts say the answer is a puzzle, which is a solid deck. Deck being the subheading there or subtitle of an article. That one is a dad deck. It's perfect. But the article is interesting. It talks about how a lot of the studies we have on this subject show reasonable associations, but not necessarily direct cause and effect between doing games or puzzles and brain health. Like there is positive research, and I'll quote the article here, quote, several studies have suggested that the more often people engage in cognitively stimulating activities, the lower their risk for cognitive impairment or the later they receive a dementia diagnosis. For example, one found that among adults who developed dementia, those who regularly completed crossword puzzles delayed the onset of memory decline by more than 2 years compared to those who didn't. That said, in that same piece and in the very next paragraph, the author quotes a professor of psychology at Clemson University as saying that if something is mentally challenging, that, quote, chances are it's pretty good for your brain. But, she added, those studies of everyday activities are not randomized controlled trials, the gold standard of science and medicine, that would provide a definitive link between cognitively stimulating hobbies and a lowered risk of dementia, end quote. So it's possible that puzzles help a little, but not necessarily proven that they help and definitely not proven that they help a lot. And even when they do help, it staves it off maybe for a couple years, which is a big deal. That could mean a lot. On the one hand, this is one of those ideas that I really want to be true, that doing puzzles every day will significantly reduce the risk of dementia when I get older. At the same time, though, perhaps the reason puzzles may not necessarily be super helpful to brain health is that puzzles are the most basic fundamental part of one's everyday existence. We do puzzles every day, all day, to some extent. Maybe they are simple puzzles like how to make the coffee last until I can get to the store again, to more complex puzzles like how do I sneak a piece of candy from my kid's Halloween basket without them noticing. But there are puzzles to be done from morning to night every single day. Farming is puzzling in every sense of the word. The other day, I was standing there looking at the remainder of the field cherry tomatoes and trying to decide what the best approach would be for removing the plants and the twine, because I used a thicker twine than normal for the trellis, one that wouldn't break down over the winter if I just left it there. That was a very small puzzle, but it was just one of many I had to solve to move forward with my day. Sometimes in farming, the puzzle is just when to harvest what, based on all the different factors, including weather and cooler space and quantities needed and so on. Almost every hour of every day on the farm, new puzzles abound, especially in farming. So effectively, if puzzles and riddles are what we are doing in both big and small ways all day long, then adding more puzzles is kind of just stopping one puzzle to do another different, albeit possibly harder, puzzle. This is, of course, just me looking in from the outside. It's complete conjecture. I'm not researching these things. And again, sense does not make science, but the question of why wouldn't puzzles be better for you is a fun puzzle on its own. And yeah, when I think about it, I arrive at the fact that puzzles are a near constant part of one's daily life already, so doing more of them is not necessarily going to have a big effect. There are other things that have shown strong or perhaps even stronger associations, such as maintaining healthy relationships and physical exercise. Like whatever that dumb thing is that you're bickering with your friend about that's keeping you from talking to each other, solving that puzzle may have an equal or greater effect on your long-term mental health than doing puzzles. Or just farming. It's both problem solving and physical exertion and potentially social if you're at the farmer's market or just communicating with your customers really well. And perhaps if that's the case, instead of stopping life to do a puzzle for brain health, you could instead do one of the many hard puzzles we all avoid in our lives. But if you just enjoy doing puzzles, as I do, I say go do the dang puzzle. It's fun. There's a reason we like them. Solving puzzles is, at its core, what we do. As farmers, as people, as parents, as family, as teachers, as coaches, as students, as someone who just is listing titles, life, like farming, is literally puzzling. All that to say, does anyone have a favorite riddle they'd like to share in the comments section? Because I'm always game. Okay, so next up, let's get a question from our Patreon members on letting cover crops run wild. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. When you need proven varieties you can count on and detailed guidance from seeding to harvest, consider Johnny's your trusted growing partner. Their same-day shipping can help keep your planting schedules on track when the unexpected happens. They're here to help you grow good food. Turning to Johnny's means you can plant high-quality, trial-proven varieties with confidence and know that their expert staff is ready to help with first-hand knowledge, because they've grown them themselves. Learn more at johnnyseeds.com. All right. Back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast more than my voice is and want to support it, you can do so at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come to me, but I will always get to those Patreon questions. Today's question comes from Patreon member Molly. It's a long comment and then a question, so I'm going to summarize the comment a little bit here. Quote, love the new show. Thanks, Molly. What I love best is the little tips, the little practical things. You should have the best farming advice be a weekly feature. Before starting my farm, I really wish I could have worked 1 year on someone else's farm. It didn't work out, but I feel I missed all those little tips and tricks that you would get from working for a well-run, well-established farm, end quote. I relate a lot to this comment. I agree that even after 2 years of interning, I still felt like I wished I had spent more time working on another farm myself, a different farm, one that used irrigation, for instance, because the farm where I interned was a dry farm, which was honestly an awesome education, but I didn't know how to use irrigation. A farm that used irrigation and grew a bit more intensively would have been very helpful considering how I grow now. If you're just starting out and you can find a farm job somewhere, give it a whirl. So much value there. And of course, I will offer more best advice I ever received over time. Okay, so back to the main part of Molly's question. They set it up like this, quote, I am in a northern latitude, so I have a short growing season and winter kill is no issue. This year, when I had 10 beds that had 3-year strawberry plants in them that were finished, we pulled them out and seeded a multi-species cover crop, annual clover, sunflowers, tillage radish, buckwheat, Italian ryegrass, phacelia, and borage. The thinking behind this mix was to rejuvenate the soil after having strawberries there for 3 years without anything being added. It grew into a jungle, but I didn't cut it down or anything because everything was at different stages and it was full of all kinds of pollinators. We have had an extremely warm autumn this year, so it normally would be killed, but is still growing. I had a group of farmers visit at the end of the summer / beginning of the autumn, and when they saw those beds, they asked me, why are you letting them grow into a jungle? Why didn't you cut it back? I understand that if you cut it back, you can stimulate the roots to grow deeper for some crops, but others, like sunflowers and borage, it would have just terminated them. Is it so bad to just let multi-species cover crops grow wild? And when would be the best times to terminate them with so many different stages in the different plants? There's a small risk of seeds, but I can tarp them before seeding. I will be topping them with a layer of compost, then transplanting, not directly seeding, into them anyway next year. Sorry for all the words. I am always looking to do things as easily as possible, so if I don't need to do something, then I would rather not do it. Molly goes on, thank you for the show. I am appreciating the work you do, making it every day. Thank you so much, Molly, for the support and the great question. There is a lot of interesting stuff to discuss here. First, in terms of rejuvenating the soil, I think that is a fun mix and certainly good for the soil. But the next time I would maybe add 1 or 2 more legumes into the mix. But depending on how much of the mix was that clover, it may be perfectly fine. However, 2 things I would also say about that particular mix, which I'll remind the listeners, was annual clover, sunflowers, tillage radish, buckwheat, Italian ryegrass, lacy phacelia, and borage. I would definitely drop the buckwheat and maybe the borage. Or I would swap them out for legumes. Buckwheat is not generally a good mixer because it is simply too fast of a grower. My assumption, not having seen these areas, would be that the buckwheat flowered, and like you said, it probably went to seed, and could present a weed issue for you in the spring. Now, as long as it's warm enough, the tarping and compost should help with that, but there is obviously still a risk there. In terms of cover crops, how I would typically use buckwheat is that I would either use it solo as a fast placeholder and or as fodder for beneficials, or I would add it 2 weeks after I sow whatever else it is that I want it to go with. Like if I sow sorghum Sudan grass and I want some buckwheat, I'll sow the sorghum Sudan grass. And once it is about 3 or so inches tall, then I'll sow the buckwheat. So the buckwheat's not shading out the sorghum Sudan. And buckwheat should be terminated about 7 to 10 days after flowering. Usually a really tight, low mowing to the ground will do the trick. Borage is about 10 to 15 days slower than buckwheat to flower, but is sneaky with how many weed seeds it can generate in a short amount of time. So I usually avoid that one as well in my cover crops. As for the mowing, you are right that some of those would likely terminate. Usually you want to plant cover crops that terminate the same way and grow at roughly the same speed, or expect that some will die and others will take over. It is tough when seasons don't do what they traditionally have. So I feel you there. A couple years back, we sowed field peas and they darn near went to seed before finally getting blasted in a freeze, thanks to an extended warm fall like we're having now. For planning purposes, I've had to push my first frost date back 10 days from October 1st to October 10th because it is not frosted before October 10th here in at least like 8 years. It has me thinking I can push my winter kill cover crops back a few days as well and still get away with it. But at some point, the combo of low sunlight and warmth isn't always super helpful. Plants need sunlight to grow, but similar to in a greenhouse, when they get more warmth than they get sunlight, they get a little thin and leggy. Anyway, perhaps planting your fall cover crops to have more legumes and grains and fewer flowering crops like buckwheat could be a better way to ensure no weed issues. That said, a warm season tarping and some compost can erase a lot of mistakes. And like I said, that mixture that you chose is certainly diverse, which will benefit the soil. So in short, I think it's fine to allow a little wildness there. But for me, I certainly prefer a little order to the wildness, a little more cohesiveness within the mix where they terminate and grow in complementary ways. Either way, though, the soil will be happy. So I do hope that was helpful, Molly, and everyone. Let me know your thoughts on cover crops and wildness. And when we come back, let's make a mess of a title. Yeah, be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Farmhand. I don't know about you, but I got into farming to be in the field growing food for my community, not creating elaborate pack lists, not writing newsletters or responding to emails, not designing and maintaining web stores, and etc. And I especially don't enjoy doing those things after an already full and fulfilling day of growing food. Actually, if I spent less time on my phone and behind the computer, that would be great. If only there were a solution for that. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for farmers. With one single platform, Farmhand enables you to offload your administrative tasks, send and manage communications, and sell more to your customers. Farmhand saves growers an average of 6 hours of administrative load each week. That's 6 hours so you can get back into the field, spend more time with friends or family, or have a life outside of the farm, which is actually a thing. Think about it. What would you do with an extra 6 hours a week? Sign up for a free trial with the link in the show notes, because now is the best time to dial in those systems for the next growing season. Follow the Farmhand link in the show notes to learn more. All right, back to the show. Okay, so I owe a bit of an apology for the title from Monday's show, where I got people excited about there being talk of planting flowers. It was titled Reclaiming an Old Garden and Giving November Its Flowers. Obviously, there are lots of flowers that folks usually plant in November or dig up in the case of dahlias, perhaps. So it would not seem unreasonable to talk about flowers in a November episode, but giving something its flowers also means giving something deserved praise, and was, for once, not the pun it could have been. It literally never crossed my mind that people would think I was going to talk about flowers in that episode, which, as a dad, feels like a total failure and missed opportunity on the play on words there. But the thing is, I'm not a flower grower, and I honestly know very little about flowers, while also at the same time really loving flowers. During the summer, I pick multiple bouquets every single week to have around the house, while also dedicating almost no attention to planting flowers in the garden. This, to be sure, has been somewhat of a theme throughout my farming life. We have ordered hundreds of bulbs for various hedges and landscaped areas over the years, only to not plant them deep enough or we lose them to weeds. Most of what I have had success with is the stuff that grows like vegetables. That would be like zinnias, cosmos, sunflowers, or lacy phacelia, because it is conveniently already there for me in the spring for my cover crop mixes. However, once you get into bulbs or anything that I have to vernalize or plant at specific times or depths, I kind of check out. It's just been a matter of capacity, honestly. I don't have the space in my brain to master a whole other sector of horticulture. I have done an embarrassing amount of hopeful planting, and especially with flowers. And the thing with hopeful planting is that it is not cheap. At least not generally. If you get a handful of dahlia tubers or something for free from a friend, then maybe. But even then, getting something for cheap or free means we should put more effort into it, not less, just because the value is so much higher. And yet, sometimes you are just stretched thin and don't have the brain space or energy or time to prepare the beds, plant the crop at the right spacing, the right depth, and then manage it throughout its life. For me, things need to have purpose. Generally economic, but could be like the popcorn, where it's got a family purpose. Snacks. Or if it doesn't have purpose, I just won't tend them. I'm thinking about this a lot right now as I'm planning, a big planting of trees over the fall and into the spring. I want to really dedicate some thought and energy into this idea. And I don't want to waste the money and work required to really establish the trees. I really want to do it right and have it be successful so that, as my kids get older and are able to help more, maybe fruit is something they can help me manage a little bit better. And doing those things right for me means giving them a purpose, formulating a management plan, and then executing it. What I don't want is to have this next phase of our farm become just another sort of messy Monday, just a big one. More like a successful Saturday project. That is to say, one where I do it so well that I can just enjoy it and not have to talk about what a failure it was or how I messed it up. That would be nice. But so much of that comes down to planning, not just for where stuff goes, but how you're going to fit that stuff into the rest of your already busy life and already busy farm business. So wish me luck on that puzzle. November is a planning and planting season. Some of you might even be planting flowers like tulips. I will not, because I know I will not have the time to manage them or sell them. But good for you. You can give November its flowers. Anyway, gonna wrap it up there. I hope everyone had a great weekend and is ready for a fun week of shows. Like and subscribe and or follow wherever you are getting this. Check us out at No-Till Growers on Instagram, or head over to the Patreon page at patreon.com/No-Till Growers. I am shouting out everyone who signs up in the month of November, just like I did in October, but you can also earn some bonus shout outs by signing up for some of the other tiers. One note, that I guess Apple is going to start taking a percentage of the in-app purchases, which also means memberships to sites like Patreon. So if you can sign up through the website, or if you have an Android, that's better for everyone except for Apple, I guess, who frankly really suck for doing that. Anyway, you know who doesn't suck? People who support us through patreon.com/No-Till Growers. You all rock. So a big shout outs today to, all right, so let's go. Let's see what we got here. Violet Warnock. Oh, Violet, that's a great name. I love it. Christina Choi. Hi, Christina. Dreamland Farmstead. That's a relative of ours, the Rough Draft. Rebecca Prochaska. Prochaska. I feel like it needs that pro because it's got that look. Rebecca Prochaska. Billy Reese. And Amy Blankenship. I went to school with a Blankenship. But it was not an Amy, I don't think. This one, that's a great list of names, you all. I love this. I've learned a lot about how terrible I am at saying names this past month, and I hope that keeps going. So big shout outs to everyone who supports us in whatever way that you can. Thanks for listening and or watching. We'll see you next week. Nope. We'll see you tomorrow.